Hi, I'm Dave from boyinaband.com, and welcome to my 7-day song tutorial on Bassline, where I'll be taking you through the process of making a bassline song from scratch over, pause for a dramatic effect, 7 days. At the end, I'll post the finished song, and you guys can post your completed songs as video responses. I'll go through things like making the beat, several different bass synths of varying dirtiness, pizzicato strings, pads, delayed piano, a bit on vocals, arrangement of a conventional bassline song, and mixing and mastering. This is the 6th 7-day song, so be sure to check out the other ones as well. And also, I encourage you to post your tracks on the boyinaband.com forum and share your music, make some friends, and learn more about production. You can go there at boyinaband.com/forum. In day 1, I'll be teaching you how to make a pacey bassline beat with techniques like using ReGroove to add swing, layering, EQ and tape compression to build a danceable basis to your track. Okay, let's begin. We'll start by setting the tempo to 135 BPM. Bassline is generally between 135 and 140, so bassline DJs don't have too much trouble mixing it together. First things first, let's right-click and create a mastering suite, M-Class Mastering Suite Combi, and bypass it. I've just realised that on a lot of the previous ones I forgot to bypass it. Now this default mastering suite doesn't do too much of the sound, but it's much better to mix without the mastering suite on. Right-click and create a mixer 14:2. And right-click and create a combinator for the first drum loop. Name the combinator Da Drums. We need to get into the spirit of bassline early on, and grammatical correctness doesn't feature heavily in bassline music. Inside the combinator, right-click and create an instance of Scream 4 Distortion. And let's bypass it for now. We'll deal with that a bit later. Right-click it and create a line mixer 6:2. And finally, an instance of our friend ReDrum Drum Computer. Now, I'm going to load up a drum kit I've made earlier. If you don't know how to load samples into Reason, check out my tutorial on how to do so. Okay, before I can show you the samples that I've got in here, we've got to press Tab to look at the back, and do a little bit of quick routing. Let's take out these links that have automatically been put in by Scream 4, and go from the output of the mixer to input of Scream 4, and the output of Scream 4 to the From Devices section in the combinator. By the way, keeping things in combinators just makes it all tidy, so you don't have thousands and thousands of these to scroll through where it's really confusing. Okay, so in this kit we've got 2 kick drums, 4 snares, and 2 hi-hats. These are all samples from the primeloops.com Bassline 4x4 UK Garage sample pack, which is unsurprisingly great for bassline music. The 2 kick drums I'll be mixing together. I've got one with a decent low end here, and another that has a nice kind of click to the start of it. To emphasize the click, you can see that here I've taken the pitch, it's generally there. By the way, hold Control and click, I think it's Command and click on a Mac, to set a parameter to its default value. That's quite a useful setting. It was in the middle there. I've taken it right up to full just to make it really high pitched, and I've taken the tone also up to full. Now obviously pitch is pretty self-explanatory, but tone is basically a brightness setting, and here it's making it more trebly and brighter, whereas if you turn it down it's much duller and only the low frequencies are emphasized. So let's have a listen again with the high end. There, much clickier. Just to ensure the clicky kick isn't too prominent though, the volume has been taken down considerably here with the level knob. Now, as I said, we're going to be layering these two together, so to link them together, hit Tab to look at the back, and here you can see there's gate out and gate in. We're going to take the gate out of the first kick into the gate in on the second kick. Now, hit Tab to see the front of the rack, and hit Trigger Drum 1 here, at the top of channel 1. If you didn't know already, by hovering over the parameters in Reason, you'll be presented with a little tooltip telling you what they're called and where appropriate their values. But yes, when you play this one here, both samples are triggered at the same time. Useful. Now, onto the snares. We have a snappy snare, a jungly kind of snare, and a snare with a decent amount of low end. There's also another kind of snappy compressed snare, but we'll come to that later. These 3 samples here will be used to layer up the main snare sound for the beat. The snappy one to give it that initial crack, the jungly one for a bit more tone and high end, and the low end snare for the punch of the sound. Bassline music doesn't always have powerful snares, so you might want to experiment by just using the snappier ones if you feel the beat is taking too much focus. Once again, hit the tab and link these up using the gate out to gate in technique we just did on the kicks. Now let's hit tab again and look at the front. That other snare we're going to use here for some ghost notes. If you've done the 7-day song on drum and bass, you might remember these. Slightly quieter snare hits done on the offbeat to make the beat more interesting and bouncy. To make it even more interesting and to show you some more of ReDrum's capabilities, we're going to do some cool stuff to the sample first. Now, if you notice in channels 6 and 7, we have these pitch bend values down here. Now, we're going to make the sample sound more interesting by changing the pitch of it over time. I've already done it here, so I'm just going to hold the control and click to set it back to normal. Yep, everything's back to the default values there, and we're going to do that now. Now, this technique of bending the pitch of a sample over time is usually used on tom drums, but I don't see any reason why we can't chuck a cheesy sounding snare in there, since the vast majority of bassline is a hilariously cheesy genre anyway. So, let's quickly go through what these 4 knobs do. Pitch controls the pitch that the sample will be bent to, bend controls what pitch it will bend from, rate defines how fast it bends, and vel, or velocity, defines how much the velocity of the note affects the bend value. So you could make it so the harder you hit the note, the higher the starting pitch is, for example. For this hit, we're going to take the pitch down to just about a quarter of the way around. Maybe a little bit higher. And the bend to just above a quarter. This means it goes from a high pitch to a low pitch. So let's have a listen to that now. Sweet! I'm happy with the rate, but feel free to change that and the velocity to your taste. Okay, and lastly, we've got our hi-hats here. Bassline is unusual in the fact that the hi-hats are generally quite a prominent part of the beat, where usually it's just the kick and snare. I've got 2 hi-hats here, both open hi-hats, since you find bassline hats are quite splashy, and that effect is achieved more by open hi-hats, but just so it's a bit more crisp and you maintain that bassline shuffle later on. I've shortened the length here of the hi-hat in channel 8 just a little bit to turn it into something about halfway between a closed hi-hat and an open hi-hat. Also, notice that the shorter hat is quieter in level, so it doesn't overwhelm the other hi-hat. Okay, so that's each of the different samples covered. Let's make this beat. First things first, make sure that kick drum is selected on channel 1, then put it 4 on the floor, 1, 5, 9, and 13 in the ReDrum sequencer down the bottom. This 4 on the floor beat is why you'll sometimes hear bassline referred to as 4x4 garage. Run the beat to test it. Sweet. Then right-click ReDrum and hit copy pattern to track. Now, if we look in the sequencer here, we can see that we've got our 4 on the floor beat all programmed in and ready. Name the note lane kick, so we don't get confused, and right-click it and hit new note lane. By making a new note lane for each layer of percussion, it means we can easily take out elements or change elements to make fills, so the track is more interesting. Okay, so name the new note lane snare, and let's put in those snare hits. Back in ReDrum, select pattern 2. This means that when we copy the pattern to the track, the kick drum pattern we just made won't be copied. Then increase the steps to 32. This means we've got 2 bars to work with instead of 1. For the first bar, make sure you've got channel 3's snare selected, and put the channel 3 snare on the 5 and 13. Then for bar 2, to get to bar 2, drag the edit steps slider up to 17 to 32. We're going to make it slightly different. We'll still have that 5 and 13, but we're going to add in the 8 and 10 as well. Now, back to the sequencer. Drag the L and R points here to cover 2 bars, and then making sure the snare note lane is selected, copy the pattern to track once again. Right-click, copy pattern to track. Sweet! Now before we're entirely finished with the snare, we're going to add in an extra little hit to turn this into a 4-bar loop. So back in ReDrum, add another snare hit on the 12th step, then drag the loop points in the sequencer across 2 bars each. And copy the new and slightly different pattern to the track. Blammo! A brilliantly bouncy beat is born. Okay, so let's get that other snare in. A similar kind of thing, hit pattern 3, make sure you're on edit steps 1 to 16, not 17 to 32 this time because we just want the 16 steps. Make sure the snare in channel 6 is selected and put 1 hit on the 10th step. We're also going to put one on the 7th step, but a slightly quieter hit. To do this, use the dynamic slider. Unfortunately, this doesn't give your sample a cape and force it to pose epically on a Gotham City rooftop, but it does allow you to change the velocity, basically the volume, of the sample on the occasion it is triggered. Now drag that dynamic slider down to soft, then click on the 7th step. You can choose between soft, medium, and hard in order to make your beat a bit more varied in volume. Let's put it back to medium for now, so when we do the hi-hats, that's all set up correctly. Now copy the pattern to a new note lane, which we're going to create now. Right click, new note lane, called Ghost Snare. This really is starting to sound like a superhero. Maybe the dynamic slider has some secret powers after all. Yeah. Make sure it's selected, then right click, and copy pattern to track. But we only want this to be triggered every 1st and 3rd bar in the 4-bar loop, so drag that down to the 1 bar, and then Control or Command on a Mac, click, drag, to copy. Lastly, let's add in those hi-hats. Select pattern 4, then add the open hi-hat, so make sure you've got that one selected, on the back beat, so that's 3, 7, 11, and 15. And have a listen to that. And there we go. And to give the hi-hat rhythm something more interesting and rolling, select channel 8, and put it in between the offbeat hi-hats. I'm going for 1, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, and 13. Now we're going to copy it to the hi-hat note lane that you already knew you were going to have to create. Right click, new note lane, hi-hat, and so with it selected, right click, copy pattern to track, and voila! Make sure you click the Enable Pattern Section button off here in ReDrum, so the ReDrum sequencer isn't playing at the same time the Reason sequencer is. Then if we hit the Loop on Off button, let's take a listen to our bassline beat. Okay, this beat is sounding alright, but it's not bouncy enough. What it needs is some shuffle. To do that, we're going to use the ReGroove mixer. Coolest name for a mixer ever. Select it at the bottom right of the Reason interface, and in channel A1, open up a shuffle preset. I'm going to go into the Reason Factory Soundbank, which is defaultly in, ReGroove Patches, MPC 60, and I'm going to try the 68% shuffle. Now that's selected, back in the Reason sequencer here, using these Select Groove drop-downs, go to channel A1 for everything. Let's have a quick listen to that now. Much bouncier, right? Cool. I think I prefer the ghost snare not being on the groove though, so if we go disabled, there we go. I think I prefer having the ghost snare off the groove setting. It's cool enough as it is with that metaphorical cape and all. Join me in part 2 where I'll be adding some EQ, compression, and using the Scream 4 unit to bring this beat together and make it sound punchier.